Joining us now is former prisoner and justice journalist David Shipley and Labour councillor Lambeth Martin Abrams. Thank you very much for joining us, gentlemen. I read this story yesterday in the Mail, and this is based on the super prisons in America, where literally you have nothing in your cell. You have a concrete stool, you have a concrete desk thing. There's no kettles, there's no TV. It's really, really hard. Isn't this what we need to protect our own prisons officers? Who wants to go first on this one?
Sure, I will. I was at the Prison Officers Association conference this week, and that's the union for frontline prison staff. And what really struck me is how normal violence against officers is. On Wednesday morning, news broke there had been two very savage attacks at HMP Woodhill, and the men and women I spoke to said it's just normal. You know, I met one man who'd had his jaw broken 3 times by officers. There is a huge level of violence, and it's just not normal or right in a workplace that people have to expect that level of violence.
Mark, I mean, surely that's a very valid point. I mean, prison officers do an incredibly hard job, and the pay isn't great either. Why should people that are convicted of sometimes doing the most hideous crime...
USA, who have, you know, hundreds of these supermax prisons, and their recidivism rates, which means they're reoffending and then re-entry into prison, are some of the highest in the world. We're talking like 80% of prisoners released are then put back into prison after 2 years for reoffending. If you look at countries like Norway that pursue, you know, one of the most sort of progressive and humane sort of prison systems in the world, their reoffending rate is below 20%, and they basically pursue a program of rehabilitation and reintegration in society. So, you know, another key point, and I think it's really good that the Prison Officer Association is mentioned, is because they have not had the right to strike for over 30 years. They've got some of the most draconian anti-trade union laws, and what that means in the workplace is that they cannot collectively bargain for better working conditions for themselves, for better conditions essentially in prisons, and it's basically like a doom loop, and prisons just get worse and worse, their working conditions get worse and worse, and we see absolutely horrific rates of assaults, as Eamon mentioned earlier.
Yeah, what prisons do you have in your constituency as a councillor there, Martin?
I don't have any in my ward in particular, but we have a Victorian prison in Brixton Prison, which you know is a really old prison. I'm from Manchester originally, my hometown, and you know got really startling similarities to the old Strangeways prison. And it is incredible that these Victorian era prisons are still being used today for prison officers to work in, for prisoners to serve their time. They're not fit for purpose, and that really just goes to show how much underfunding has been put into the prison and rehabilitation system, and that's why we've got significantly higher recidivism rates than a country like Norway. We need investment. We need to pursue a program of rehabilitation and reintegration rather than these draconian supermax prisons.
But you see, listening to what Martin had to say there, David, I sort of despair, because I'm sure he's right, but it ain't going to happen because the money ain't there and the will isn't there. And what governments don't realise is that people are very happy that their taxes should go on things like police forces and prison systems and whatever. But why do politicians just not listen to that? Because everybody wins, everybody loses if the system's wrong, and everybody wins if the system and reintegration is right.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. A couple of things that Martin said. The supermax prisons that are being proposed are not for all prisoners. That we're specifically looking at them for the most dangerous men, sadistic killers, terrorist murderers who realistically will never be released. So this doesn't really feed into the debate about rehabilitation. These are prisoners with no realistic prospect of ever being released or rehabilitated. He is absolutely right that in the prison system generally, we're very bad at rehabilitating. You know, a lot of men just get locked in their cells for 23 hours a day, staring at daytime TV, taking drugs. Nothing really effective or good happens in most BCAT and CCAT jails. And it's not really about the buildings. I know people like to focus on the buildings, but lots of terrible jails that have high levels of violence and drugs are in modern buildings. Some older jails can be run well. It's more about the people in there and the culture. And I think this is the real problem. The Ministry of Justice and the leadership of the prison systems had a really bad, toxic culture, in many ways morally corrupt culture for a long time, and no one really wants to grapple with that.
Well, somebody's going to have to grapple with 10,000 assaults. I don't know how they recruit people to the profession. Guys, thanks for airing the subject there. People will have their thoughts and their considerations, and they'll be getting in touch with us throughout the programme this morning. So, former prisoner and justice journalist David Shipley, thank you very much indeed. Labour councillor for Lambeth, Martin Abrams, thank you very much indeed. Unfortunately, we've got to leave it there. Thank you.